Welcome back, everyone, to Talk Your Abs Off. Today, I am joined by an amazing friend and previous colleague, Kiley Madigan, and I am so excited to have her with us today. Kiley, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having
So
me.
good. Love that. Kiley, why don't you start just by sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, my name is Kylie. I'm a personal trainer and a group exercise instructor, and I'm based out of New York City, primarily Brooklyn. Abby and I met through a corporate fitness job a few years ago, and I'm really grateful that we're still connected. And now I am on my own, running my own business, working with a variety of clients and participants on goals as broad as I need the accountability to show up and exercise once a week, and as specific as I want to work on increasing my turnout and jumping power for my Broadway auditions. I work with a lot of dancers. I grew up dancing, so that's something that's really fun for me, is I get to intersect those two worlds. But I do work with a variety of clients. Not all of them are dancers, so it's really fun to be able to meet various people, especially in New York City. Everyone has such different and crazy jobs, so it's just a really fun time out here, training and teaching.
Yeah, that's amazing. Where did you go to school? What's your degree in?
Yes, so I went to school at the University of Alabama. I got my degree in exercise science and dance, so really exactly what you would expect after I told you what my job was. But I grew up like Abby in Wisconsin, and I've been dancing for as long as I can remember. And that's really what got me to fall in love with movement. So I do credit dance with getting me into the exercise science field. I also grew up dealing with an injury, an at birth injury. So I was in physical therapy at a very, very young age. I was exposed to like prescribed movement at a very young age and how much that could help someone. I thought that physical therapists were the coolest people in the world. They still are. But at the time I was like, that's what I want to be. And then I ended up just doing that, but with less schooling. So go to your physical therapist when your personal trainers can't answer your questions, folks.
That's amazing. I love that so much. So you mentioned that you work with a lot of dancers, which I think is amazing. I did my time in dance. Don't do it so much anymore. I like to get a fun class in when I can, but I think it's amazing that kind of like that's your specialty, especially since it's something that you grew up doing. So can you tell me about the importance of strength training and mobility when it comes specifically to dancers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that dancers are a really unique population when you think about athletes, which dancers absolutely are, but you kind of traditionally look at those sports that we see in high school. And I mean, of course, like dance team is one of them, but dancers can just kind of get excluded from that athlete or those sports conditioning traditional teachings that we learn. And dancers are actually at an incredibly high risk for injury. Research demonstrates that 85 to 95% of dancers will be affected by injury at some point in their career, which is
Wow.
crazy. And also, dancers have a super high pain tolerance. So, a lot of dancers will be scared to ask for help because they'll be like, oh, the doctor's going to tell me that I can't dance. And then they just won't go get it seen, or they'll be afraid to. And then things can get worse. So typically, the biggest risk for injury is overuse. Um, Dance takes a lot of practice, and you're doing the same things repeatedly, and that's going to wear the muscle down or the joint down. And if we're not taking adequate rest days and doing adequate cross training, that can be really stressful on the body. And so, strength training for dancers, cross training is another term that we can use for that. Like whether that's endurance, strength, mobility based, that's going to come in as a modality of strength training that's different from the dance technique that they're working on. So it's monumental because what it's going to do is come in and help dancers build their strength, build their power, but it's going to be in a different modality than just repetitively doing those same movements that they want to get better at. And that's actually a mistake that I see happen in cross training a lot, is dancers will be like, oh, I want to get better at this move, so I'm going to do it a million times, or I'm going to do it with ankle weights on, or I'm going to go take a bar class. Don't get me wrong. Love a bar class, not trying to cut down on that. But I generally see that dancers don't necessarily need more of that. They need to strip down, take away that dance technique, and they need to do basic functional strength training. So like I'm always making my dancers, I'm like, turn your toes into parallel. We're doing a squat, your butt is sticking back. You're not doing a plie. So it's very interesting to have to actually pull things back to more basic. And strip down that dance technique and make it very, very functional, just so that the muscles are well equipped to go back to the dance and take on more volume without that risk for overuse. And honestly, I think the same thing can be said for mobility. It's mobility as well as dynamic flexibility training, in my opinion, isn't taught enough. There's a lot of static stretching that happens for a dancer, and that has its place. I would say typically at the end of a rehearsal, at the end of a class, that's going to be a really great time when your body's warm to increase that flexibility in a static stretch. But mobility training, when I learned it as an adult, I was like, I don't know if I would have actually listened to someone when I was a teenager, because teenagers listen. I didn't listen to anyone, but I do wish that I had the information, because being able to move through through the full range of motion at a joint in a dynamic way is so, so good for increasing your range of motion at the joint, and dynamic flexibility training as well for the muscle. It's so great during our warm-ups, and it's going to engage your muscle in a much more engaging way that's going to make you feel stronger and be able to use the full capacity of the muscle in your class. And so being able to teach dancers about that and having them feel the difference, like especially I have a variety of clients, like I mentioned, but like I have clients that are working 6-day weeks on a cruise ship doing multiple shows a day. And the strength training is great, but I really feel like I get the most positive feedback from this, like the mobility day that you included for me, that has changed my life. So like I don't feel pain in my hips when I wake up in the morning anymore. Like that's huge. That can make a huge difference.
That's incredible. I think you nailed it spot on. Just the importance of both mobility and the strength training kind of together. Because a lot of times, even just with clients who aren't dancers, we'll see people who want to strength train and then not focus on mobility. And then they're wondering why they're hurt all the time. And it's like, well, if we're not going to move our body through the full range of motion, I'm guilty of it myself occasionally if I'm focusing on something and mobility goes out the window. And you mentioned, kind of moving the joints through the full range of motion. And I was doing, it reminded me of a continuing education credit that I was doing for my yoga instructor training. And it was this guy who said, that yoga it was the craziest thing. I couldn't believe he said it. And I'm sure it like ruffled feathers within the yoga industry, but he said not to stretch, but to strengthen instead. So let's say like you have like hamstring or hip pain, but we'll say hamstring just for this. And so instead of like static stretching this hamstring, we're going to strengthen it, but like body weight by itself. So we're going to contract that muscle, hold for 6 seconds, release, and do that 6 times. And so we're going to focus on strengthening a muscle that's probably underutilized or is not performing correctly. And we're going to teach it how to work correctly. And then once you do it, like you're actually going to be able to pull that leg up higher behind you. Or like same thing with the hips when we're leaning forward into a forward fold, when we're reaching towards our toes. A lot of times it's going to be a weakness in the hip flexors and weakness in the core. And so strengthening that, it's not necessarily a lack of mobility through the hamstrings. So the static stretching, if you notice, like people aren't going to get any farther just by static stretching. Sometimes you can, but having that extra strength in the core and in the hamstrings is going to be able to pull you farther into that stretch. So that reminded me of that, and I wanted to mention it.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, because actually this happens to a lot of people, but I find it so frequently within dancers. There's this misconception that strength and flexibility are at the expense of each other. And I actually find that they go hand in hand. And I'm kind of like looping mobility into that same flexibility category. But a lot of dancers, because they feel like they need to kick their face, they will never strengthen their hamstrings. And then they'll be like, my hips always hurt. Like my hip flexors are so tight. And I'm like, your hamstrings aren't strong enough. And now your quads and your hip flexors are overcompensating. Correct. And so what we need to do is strengthen the hip flexors, strengthen the hamstrings. And stretching can be a tool, right? Like I feel like when I have so many clients, I'm sure you do too, that have back pain. And I'm like, listen, let's stretch that back, because it's going to help you feel better today.
Right.
And then let's do core work because that's going to help you feel better tomorrow.
Amen. Amen
Because
to
that strength is gonna keep your posture stronger. It's gonna help you from what I'm doing right now, which is turning into a little shrimp while I sit at my desk. But we're all working on it, right?
Oh, every single one, as I'm like, okay, yep, you're right. I'm shrimping it
Roll
up.
the shoulders back, deep breath.
That's so funny. I love that so much. So I know you mentioned that overuse injuries are like the most common thing that you see within dancers. So would you say that there's any other challenges that you see within the dance community when it comes to exercising?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tricky place because my goal as a trainer is to come in and say, how can we make you the safest that you can be? How can we make you the strongest that you can be so that your dancing improves? And this isn't necessarily like to call out or blame anyone for having this goal, but a lot of dancers, because of the way that the industry is set up, their goal is to come in and get smaller. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but that means that in a lot of dancers' minds, they're like, I should just do cardio, 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 cardio. I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a dietitian, but like maybe not fueling themselves enough. Obviously, that's a whole issue within itself. But from my end, I want to make sure that my clients are coming in properly fueled. I want them to get stronger and put on muscle because that's going to make them safe. And that scares a lot of dancers, just the concept of potentially putting on muscle, potentially not getting smaller. And again, I'm not here to judge those dancers because it's not their fault that the industry is set up the way that it is. I am seeing more trainers like myself that are focused on stronger, safer dancers rather than smaller dancers, which is amazing. And I am seeing change in the industry too, right? I'm seeing the stereotype of the petite dancer. At least maybe I'm surrounding myself with the right people, but I'm seeing that less and less, and I'm seeing more body types. I hope that continues because certainly we are nowhere near perfect yet. But yeah, I think working on my clients with mindset and trying to get them to see safety first, and also supporting them and being like, it's okay to have aesthetic goals, but know that my goal is to keep you safe and strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest things, and I love to hear that, especially as a trainer whose focus is also, safety. We want to move pain free, and we want to live for a long time, right? Like we want to be able to have a high quality of life, keep moving. And I think, especially within the dance industry, I don't know how long a career can be within the dance industry, and I think that's another thing too. Is it's making sure that you're taking care of your body now and not beating the crap out of it, so that as you age, then it's just gonna, you're gonna feel a lot more of that pain. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. I mean, I have started taking care of myself, I would say like post college. And I have knee pain and I'm not 30 yet. And I'm like, well, listen, teenage me did not listen to anyone. She was overdoing her turnout. But the more that we can start that education young, and make sure that strength training is, I think some of the most important teachings is passing on what I know to other dance teachers, even if they're not personal trainers, but making sure that they have that knowledge so that it can be baked into the fun of the dance class. So even if you're 12 and you're like, I actually don't care about the science yet because I'm just here to dance and move my body. But if those teachers can be teaching it in the most safe way possible, and kind of like sneaking in that strength work, that mobility work, I think that can make a huge difference.
Totally. I 100% agree. And since you say that too, you and I, we're about the same age. And I don't know if you saw this when you were growing up or if you did other sports. So I grew up doing like the running sports. So it was rec soccer, it was also dance, and it was cross country. So
Okay.
I think about track and cross country and at least I would say the endurance sports. Like I don't remember going into the weight room, right? So we would work a little bit of core, and then we would just go and run. And I just think, like, I wonder how much more, like how much stronger, how many less injuries I personally, but we as a collective would have had we gone into the weight room at that age in high school. And I know, the football teams lift, the basketball teams, the volleyball teams, but there are other teams that should also be getting that knowledge that wasn't necessarily thought of. So I'm hoping, I obviously am not really in that space now, so I don't know if coaches are implementing that more with the more like endurance or kind of like off sports that aren't like the big, football, basketball, volleyball, things like that.
Mhm.
So that makes me think of that. And I just always have my fingers crossed that the strength and conditioning world is kind of catching on to that at a younger age, like you said.
Absolutely. Like my dream is I don't think I'll ever be a studio owner, but to see a dance studio that has like a built-in weight room,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it would be so cool to empower dancers. When I was a teenager, was scared of lifting heavy because I thought it was going to make me bulky. Like I didn't know about, I bought into what like 17 magazine told me. Like
Oh my gosh, yeah.
that was my form of education at that point. So if I could have been empowered to be like, it's actually so fun to like squat really heavy, like I don't know. It could have been a totally like if I would have started weightlifting sooner. I don't know. It's just very interesting to think about. But I think that a really cool concept would be to just see all of these like high school girls going from the studio to the weight room and doing like the leg press machine. That's just a dream of mine.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Especially just even as kids, like you don't have to lift super heavy when you're a kid, but at least getting the motions down and getting the basics and
Yes,
kind of bringing those along as you age. I think that's so cool. I think that
absolutely.
would be cool if it
Hmm.
happens. We'll see. um,
We'll figure it out. Maybe there is a studio out there. If you're listening, let
yeah.
us know. I
or,
want to come visit.
or maybe there are schools that are starting middle school and high school runners and dancers in the weight room. It'd be amazing.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
So I know there's different types of dance, right? So like I grew up doing the typical ballet, tap, and jazz, and now that I'm an adult, I do more of like the fun, like heels class or like hip hop classes.
Hmm.
Do you find that different dance forms require different strength or mobility exercises?
Honestly, at the start, no.
Mm,
So I think, of course, when you get into the nitty gritty of things, you're going to find that every person, every style is going to need a slightly altered program based on their goals. But when a dancer first comes to me, again, the hardest thing is to get them to let go of their dance technique and say, hey, let's do some functional strength programming. And honestly, I would treat them very similar to any other client that came my way that's a non-dancer, and just get them strong first. And then, of course, from there, if there are specific goals or specific moves within that style that they're working on, absolutely. I have a few like aerial dancers that I work with that do like hoop and all of those fun things. And listen, we're doing pull-ups, we're doing dead hangs because that's super important to have that grip strength that's unique from a dancer who's not necessarily hanging.
right.
But that is, of course, something we build up to. First, I'm like, hey, well, you know what you need? A strong core, just like every other dancer. So I find that they all kind of tend to start from the same place. And then we can always build up from there like any other client.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes total sense. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So I've been following your social media since I've known you back 5 years ago. And what I love to see, especially recently, you've really dove into weight neutrality, which I
Mm.
think is so cool, especially within the dance industry, kind of like you talked about. So can you tell me a little bit more about weight neutrality for those who might be hearing it for the first time or who just might need a refresher on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and anyone who is interested in learning more about this, I am by no means an expert. It is something that I practice with myself and with my clients, but there are some really incredible people out there that practice this, that are at the forefront of this movement, as well as I would say like the body positive movement, the fat liberation movement, all of those things. But I can absolutely talk about how it applies to me and how I use it in my business. Essentially, weight neutrality um, within my life, I consider it. There are going to be days that body image is going to go up and down. Especially, you can probably look at the story that I've already told and come to a few conclusions that you're probably right about me. I have had a past of, I grew up dancing. I've had a lot of difficulties with my own body image. There are positive days, there are negative days. I'm really, really grateful that I now am in a pretty good place where I can pass on some of the tools I use to be weight neutral. But I mean, in college, especially, um, I had a tough go of it. I have a history of disordered eating, really, really extreme exercise behaviors. It was not serving me. Um, And I actually think it was during the pandemic in 2020. I'm
Oof.
shut up in my apartment. I am like I have nothing to do. And I actually kind of like wandered into the weight neutral side of fitness Instagram. And I was like, what is this? And I got very curious. And I discovered weight neutrality and health at every size and intuitive eating and all of these things that really helped me recognize some of the very diet culture things that I was practicing. That honestly, I was like, I had no idea that I was doing because it's so baked into our culture. And I just want to reemphasize that I'm never here to judge anyone that is doing any of those things because I think it's so normalized. But during the pandemic, it was just very difficult living in Brooklyn in this 500 square foot apartment and not being able to move much and wake up every day and feel good in my body. And so I after doing a lot of learning, I noted that, okay, I'm not going to feel positive about my body every day when I wake up, but can I wake up and can I respect my body? Can I be neutral about how I feel, respect myself, fuel myself adequately, and like I would remind myself, I'm like, this is a body that's helping me survive a pandemic. It's helping me survive this massive change in my lifestyle as well, where I'm literally just trying to make it day by day without going crazy and without worrying about my loved ones. So that was a major shift for me. And I actually think that over the last few years, I've been able to implement that in my business. And it's been really cool to see, because first of all, I've always had it where the client leads. You talked about this in your first episode of your podcast, where you want your client to be bringing you your goals rather than placing your goals on them. But it's very interesting since I've stopped bringing up weight. It's totally fine if a client comes to me and has weight loss goals. But if I don't bring it up, way less people talk about weight loss than I expect. Like, I
Love.
actually don't. And maybe at this point, I'm just bringing in people that also tend to be weight neutral. I find that like attracts like. I'm sure you find that with your
Totally.
clients too.
Totally. Yeah.
But it is interesting to just drop assumptions. And people come in and they're like, oh, I want to get more functional in this way. Oh, I have this goal, or I'm going to run this race later. Can you help me? And then sometimes weight will come up later. So it's been nice to really drop all of my assumptions. And I think too that when a client does show up and has weight loss goals, I try to be really clear to them that I am a personal trainer and I'm not necessarily a fat loss coach. I can be here to support them on whatever journey they want, but I can't guarantee them something that is affected by so many more things than just their fitness routine. I mean, weight loss is so dependent on so many variables: genetics, nutrition, stress, sleep. Like there's just so many things that go into it, that, hey, I can support you, but my goal as your trainer, again, it comes back to what I said about the dancers. I'm here to make sure that they're stronger, that their day-to-day life is more functional, and that they're receiving health benefits. And then that way they can kind of know what to expect from my services too. I mean, there are people out there that do specialize in being a fat loss coach, and that's great and that's fine. But I always want to be really clear about that too, because I do consider myself to be a weight neutral trainer. It's okay if they come to me with those things, but in my opinion, there are way more important things for me to worry about than their weight. I'd rather worry about how they feel and how they're progressing in their exercises and their functional movement.
100%. I agree to that. I love to hear it again from another trainer. I feel similarly, and like similar to you, I am, pretty grateful that the clients that I have, their main goal is to get stronger, and to just be healthier. That's, obviously, weight loss, change in body composition can come with that. But when you have the basis of, I want to be stronger, I want to be healthier, and then especially when we see, changes in blood pressure, changes in cholesterol, like those to me are really big wins, because the number on the scale might not change, but what's going on inside your body and what's actually, making you healthy, or things that you want to work on, like that's what's important to me, because those numbers can affect way more. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I find that people they get so much more out of their fitness routine. Like, it's okay if you have those aesthetic goals too, but I just find that people are so much more motivated. Like, we're always going to be very self-critical. So if you have an aesthetic change that you want to make, I found that my past self, when that was what I was focused on, it was never enough. Like, there was always something that I wanted to change. But if I set a goal of being like, I want to be able to do a pistol squat. When I do a pistol squat, it is a party. Like, I am excited. I'm not going to be like, I mean, of course, then I can increase that goal and I can always get stronger. But like, I'm ecstatic that I hit it. I'm not like still staring in the mirror and being like, well, why didn't that number magically fix everything?
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I want to say one other thing that you talked about on one of your Instagram stories the other day, and I've heard it from other people before, but I love hearing it. And so if other personal trainers are listening, the thing that you said was your body is not your business card. Ooh, girl. Okay,
Yes.
because let me tell you, like even as personal trainers, like we are self-conscious too. And we have the education that we know what can help people get healthier, and we know how to keep ourselves healthy too, but our bodies also aren't going to always reflect that, like especially when you own your own business. You don't always have the time to put in the work to make those aesthetic goals, and especially if those aesthetic goals aren't necessarily, like you said, serving you, then like, you know, like for me, I work out when I have time, and I'll go to the gym, and usually it's maybe like a twice a week full body, like full body workout, because that's what I can fit in my schedule at this time. And that's, yeah, I think it's a good, it's like being a good role model, because then we're showing, okay, with a busy life, like you can still be healthy. Like I'm still healthy, I'm not like jacked, and that's okay. Like it's being okay with that.
Absolutely. And I think too, like, because we all have different lifestyles and we all have these other variables at play that are also different, our genetics and our stress levels and our daily schedules. I always remind people, like, don't go find a personal trainer or a group exercise instructor. Like, don't do it based on like, oh, I want to look like them, or oh, like they're similar to me. Like, I have people that take my classes. I think this is the reason I was talking about it on my Instagram, but like, I will have these men that come into my class that can lift so much more than me. And I think that's amazing. But they're coming to my class because they know that they like the way that I cue and the way that I program, because it makes them stronger and they can progress week by week. So like, just don't be afraid of taking a class from someone that looks different than you, or maybe doesn't look like you expect, because again, the body isn't always reflecting someone's knowledge and their ability to program. And frequently I find that it's not that way at all. So that, I love that you brought that point up.
Yeah, and I love that you said it, because I was like, I needed it that day. I was like, girl, you're right. My body's not my business card.
It's hard in this industry, and like, not to take a moment to complain about being a personal trainer, but it is hard in this industry because I think we work in this field. Sometimes people think that we're not vulnerable to take body comments negatively. Like, I have had some people say things to me that I'm like, you should not say that out loud to a person about someone's body. And that's not to cut anyone down. You know, like, a lot of people are saying it from a perspective of like reflecting back on themselves. But I think that people have to be reminded that, like, yeah, we have our insecurities too. We're just trying to make it and get through our weeks as well. And our bodies are not up for comment, and they also are not our business card. Yeah.
Yeah, not up for comment. I love that. Well, on the topic of weight neutrality, something else that I love that you do is you do these little cookie reviews occasionally.
I sure do.
And I would love to hear about how this started and kind of what that looks like. For those of you who don't follow Kiley, she'll post these cute little, like, she'll go somewhere in New York and find these cookies, and they look delicious. And then she posts these little reviews about it. I don't even live in New York, and I'm like, oh, that is amazing. I want to eat that cookie. Like, next time I'm in New York, I'm writing that down.
Absolutely. Yeah. To all 5 of my fans, I'm like, hey, here are the best cookie places in New York. No, it's very silly. It started so informally. I just have a huge sweet tooth. And where I most frequently take dance class in Manhattan, it's on the same block as a cookie shop. And I had gone there a few times, but it kind of got to the point that when I walk out of the studio, I take a right to get to the subway that takes me home, but you take a left if you're going to the cookie shop. And I noticed that it was like a Pavlov's dog situation, where I was so conditioned that, like, I wouldn't even think about it in my head. I would turn left, I would go get my cookie before I came home. And so, like, it was like just this routine of having my little treat after class. And I have a lot of friends that knew how passionately I felt about cookies. And I think that at some point I posted on Instagram and was like, okay, time for me to branch out, like, give me some other suggestions. And I got this very long list, because people feel very passionately about cookies, let me tell you. And someone responded and was like, can you review them as you do them? And I was like, ha ha ha, like who's going to follow along with that? And then it just kind of got out of hand. So I actually waited in the cookie shop that I frequent. I waited and did that like fifth. I think I've done like 10 now over like 2 years because there's just only so much time in a week. But yeah, I waited until like fifth because I was like, I don't want it to be too biased. Like I need to get a few other cookie reviews underneath my belt before. But like I have this very ridiculous system of rating everything, like different categories out of 5, and then I average it all out, and I have a list of like roughly 10 cookie shops and their rankings. So if you're going to New York City, so far out of the cookies I've tried, Culture Espresso is the best. And that's not the cookie shop I frequent, but I love them. I love them, and that cookie is the perfect after dance treat, and I will never think otherwise. But Culture Espresso is really, really good. It's really good.
I
like,
love that.
Very few notes. So,
and I think it's so cool, especially when it comes to like the weight neutrality. Is it's like we are allowed to exercise and then get a cookie. You are allowed to have these treats whenever you want. One of my things, and it's so funny. I feel like on every episode, I'm like, I saw this thing on Instagram, and it's just my viewpoint on something. So the thing that got me is it was this woman who, whenever it's like her time of the month when she's menstruating, like you said, Pavlov's dog, like she rewards herself for starting her period by getting a donut. And I was like, ding, ding, like brilliant idea. And I started doing it. You know what? And it's so funny because it's like, obviously it's not something that we look forward to, but I find that I'm like, oh, it's almost here. Like I almost can have like this donut. So I'm like,
honestly, that's great.
And it is like the best. It's gone in like 3 seconds, but it's like just the perfect thing. And it's occasionally, but it's still allowing myself to like have that treat and like without guilt. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's been huge for me. To step away from dieting. I think that there are ways to have nutritional guidelines that you're following that can be totally safe. For me, not tracking a lot of stuff and having the freedom to have those things is just much better with the past that I have of disordered eating. But it has been life-changing to be like, I am no longer limiting these things. I'm not feeling guilty for stopping at a cookie shop, or like what I like to do is get the cookie. I don't have it immediately, and then I have it with my coffee the next morning. And let me tell you, starting your day off on that note turns your whole day around. But it's just been life-changing to take away the mindset of like, I only get this so often, and that's really pulled me out of like I used to restrict and then binge, and now it's just like there's something that's a little sweet, honestly, that's a part of every single day of my life. And I'm no longer having stomach aches because I'm like, oh, I only get ice cream once a month, and now I'm going to eat the whole pint in a sitting, and now I'm ill. Like, it's just like, it's been very monumental for me personally. And I know that that's not, intuitive eating isn't the right path for everyone, but whew, it's been monumental for sure.
That's amazing. So apart from kind of like shifting how you eat food, could you share a little bit more about your health and wellness journey, like that you've taken, and your dance journey and how it got you to where you are now?
Yeah. I feel like I've shared a lot of it, so I'm going to try not to be repetitive, but I think that growing up with the injury that I had, which I was born and my left arm was paralyzed because I was a very big baby, and I probably should have been a C-section, but I wasn't.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so like shout out to my mom for being an absolute queen. But yeah, so my shoulder got injured on the way out, and it was paralyzed. And then after 3 months, I started moving it, which was amazing, but I actually never regained full range of motion. So like bicep curls are very difficult for me. My elbow doesn't want to come all the way in. It's very strange. I can manipulate it to go there, but the motor nerves are all messed up. I'm going to see if I can say this right. It's Erb's palsy in the brachial plexus nerve. And that's about as far as I can go. My sister, who's a doctor, is great at explaining that. But I think growing up with an injury, it was hard sometimes as a kid to like, my arm kind of stuck out, and I was trying to like, I was in dance and trying to like do dance competitively and have this injury hold me back. But I think over the long run, it actually made me much more resilient and honestly a way better trainer because I'm so much more compassionate. I think towards someone that comes to me with an injury, and like, guess what? We can work around it. Like, I'm never going to be able to do a perfect pull up, but I'm working on it in my own way. And so when a client's like, well, I'm never going to be able to do that, I'm like, that's okay. There's a workaround for everything.
Yeah.
So I think that that was a huge part of my journey. As well as, honestly, it was not fun to go through a big toxic fitness culture phase when I was at like the peak of dancing in college. But I think that finding recovery for myself in that has also allowed me to become like the niche trainer that I am, and serve the clients that need someone who is weight neutral, or someone that is just kind of taking the pressure off of their body and allowing it to be about joyful movement, functional movement, and just showing up
Yeah.
for themselves. Um, yeah, I think that kind of covers the stuff that we didn't cover.
Totally. And I will say, I can't remember if I think you've told me about this injury before, but I forgot about it. And I can honestly say, so for those of you, Kylie's going to share her socials at the end. Go and look at her dance videos because she is an incredible dancer. And Kylie, just like by watching those videos, like I would never know that like you had any kind of like motor, like neural issues with like your, like, it's just, it's beautiful to watch you. Like it's something that you're passionate about. And I think it's amazing. And like you've obviously overcome like a lot through that. And I love how that's also inspiring you to like help other people overcome their own, like whether it's an injury or other things that like they're going through. I think that is amazing. You're amazing.
Thank you. That brings me so much joy, because kind of like we were talking about with our bodies, like I can do as much work as possible on like the mental side of it, but it is still an insecurity sometimes to know that like just my arms don't move perfectly symmetrically. But also I have to remind myself that like that is what makes me unique, and that like if my joy is shining through in my dancing, that's what's most important.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Well, the last part of our show here, it's something new that we started. It is called Absolution. So it is a part of the show where you tell me something within fitness culture that you think that should be absolved and that we should free ourselves from the guilt and punishment of. So Kylie, what do you have for me?
Amazing. I mean, I'm sure you could like go back through everything that I said today and make a list of the things that I'm like, this is what I would change within the dance and fitness industries. But honestly, if I had to pick for my clients, if I could just absolve them of guilt and punishment from anything, I think it would be like the choice of activity. I have so many people that show up and they're so stressed and they're like, I don't like running and I don't know what to do about it. And I'm like, listen, we don't have to go for runs. Everything counts. Like it can be, we can take a Zumba class together. You don't want to be in public? You can have a dance party in a room. Like walking counts. Like every activity is an activity. And whatever gets you moving that feels joyful and feels fun, I think that that's the most important way to do it. I think the same thing with strength training. Like a lot of people will be like, I'm not super excited about it, but I know that it's good for me. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me what activities you like to do. And say they're like, they hike in their free time. I'm like, okay, what if we very specifically structured your strength training to help you improve at your hiking? And then it's like, okay, yes, maybe you don't literally want to show up for every workout. Maybe it's not the most joyful thing in the world, but is it helping you feel better during your joyful movement? Absolutely. So I think just pulling the guilt out of like feeling like you're exercising the wrong way. There is no wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we are absolving the feeling of guilt around exercises that don't bring us joy and that we don't want to do. I
Absolutely.
love that. I think that's
Absolutely. Sorry, that
absolutely
was so cheesy.
okay. Really funny thing. So my podcast name was between Talk Your Abs Off and Absolution. And one of my clients helped me with this. And he was like, you know what? Him and his wife are both my clients. And they were like, we really like them both. So why don't you do Talk Your Abs Off with an absolution portion of the show? I was like,
Love
sold,
that.
sold
That's
me.
great.
Yeah. Anyway,
Best
so
of all
that's
worlds.
absolutely. Oh my gosh. You killed it. All right, Kylie, if people want to follow you and learn more about what you do, watch your dance videos, ask you questions, where can they find you?
Absolutely. So on social media, I'm primarily on Instagram. I try to TikTok, but I'm not there very frequently. But both my Instagram and my TikTok are at Kiley Madigan, and Kiley is spelled Kiley, which I imagine will go in your show notes. But regardless, it's different than the normal Kiley, so that's why I say it. And then my website is flatironforgefitness.com, and that's where more information about me and all of my on-demand workouts live.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Kiley. Appreciate your insight into the dance community and the education around that. Always love talking to you. I'm glad we could do this.